Got your eye on a Mazda CX-5? Let's face it, most people do. It's the best-selling car in the booming mid-sized SUV segment. It's a really good option for the vast majority of buyers, blending strong pricing, good practicality, and sleek styling. No wonder it sells so well. But now there's a new mid-sized SUV contender, one that arguably offers just as much, if not more, than the CX-5. It's the all-new Peugeot 3008. And just look at it. The Peugeot 3008 arrives in Australia with plenty of cred. It won the 2017 European Car of the Year award, and it's the first SUV ever to have been awarded that accolade. So can it be a contender to the crown in Australia? The CX-5 is consistently one of the best rated vehicles in its segment, and also one of the biggest sellers. For every 100 of these, they could theoretically only sell maybe a handful of these. But I'm so intrigued by this Peugeot 3008 that I've assembled these two to put them up against three criteria: prettiness, practicality, and performance. And because we want to give them both the best chance they can possibly have, these are the two high-spec versions of each car. Obviously, styling is subjective, and it's not my job to tell you which has better styling, but given the inherent exclusivity of the Peugeot brand, there's every chance you'll feel more special, more individual if you drive it. The front end of the Peugeot is considerably more aggressive, less sleek, and more in your face than the Mazda. The bold grille and chunky front bumper flow through to a muscled body and a pert backside with LED taillights that look like they've been clawed by a cranky cat. It's so much more attractive than the existing Hunchback 3008. The Mazda is considerably more Japanese in its styling. The headlights are quite small, the grille is large, but it doesn't have the same aggression as the French upstart. The rear is rounder, and to my eye, it just isn't as good looking. You can make up your own mind about the look, but what's harder to argue against is the interior of the Peugeot. Just take a look at it. The watch strap leather may be optional, but gosh, it's gorgeous, and this spec has massaging seats as well. And how good is that full digital instrument cluster display in front of the driver? I love the layout of the cabin in here. It feels like you're cocooned in the driver's seat, like you would be in a supercar, with the media screen pointing towards you and this big center console dividing the two zones between the driver and the passenger. The tiny little steering wheel might take some getting used to, and so might this rather phallic gear selector. But everything is really beautifully finished, like these switches. They're all really lovely to look at. Kind of reminds me of a Lamborghini. And the materials as well, this suede look finish, it's just lovely. This could be the most thoughtful French car ever when it comes to storage. There are huge door pockets, good-sized cup holders, and a huge covered bin between the front seats. The bad news is that big centre console might eat into rear seat legroom, particularly if you're trying to fit three people across. And if you're quite tall, you might struggle for headroom if you option this big glass roof. But otherwise, it's a pretty nice place to be back here. There's rear seat air vents, a 12-volt outlet, and a European power point, which is really handy in Australia. I mentioned thoughtful storage earlier, and the Peugeot trumps the Mazda for boot space. There's 520 litres of cargo capacity in the boot of the 3008, where the CX-5 has just 442 litres. The Mazda does have handy 40-20-40 split folding rear seats though. Seems like the Peugeot stacks up pretty well then. Let's see how the CX-5 goes, starting with backseat space. Well, there's no panoramic roof in here, so headroom's actually really good. Legroom is decent as well, and while the middle seat looks more like a temporary spot, there's okay space here. In this flip-down center armrest, there are USB points, which the Peugeot can't match. And what about up front? There's no denying the CX-5 is a really smart space. The storage is all really well thought out, and the materials all look and feel premium. The MZD Connect media system might not be as special to look at, but it is easier to use with a rotary dial controller and a more intelligent menu system. But where the Peugeot maybe felt a bit more futuristic and funky, the Mazda feels kind of traditional and maybe a little bit boring. There's only one small digital dial and everything else is very much as we've come to expect from the Japanese car maker, which could be perfect for you depending on what you may want from your car. It seems like it could be a whitewash to the Peugeot. It's prettier, well, I think it is, and it also appears to be more practical. So does the Mazda have the performance to better its opponent? The CX-5 Akira that I'm driving has a 2.2 litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel engine, which is slightly larger than the Peugeot's 2 litre mill. The Mazda outguns its rival for grunt with 420 Nm of torque, which is 20 more than the Peugeot, but it does have just a little bit less power, 129 kilowatts versus 133. That may all sound like gobbledygook to you, but what you need to know is that they both offer strong engine performance. The diesel engine is a little bit noisier in the Mazda than it is in the Peugeot, but the transmission is smarter. The 6-speed automatic does a better job of choosing the right gear at the right time. Mazda is known for making its cars fun to drive, and the CX-5 doesn't disappoint on that either. It does feel really quite good in corners, particularly because it's got the all-wheel drive system and because of the steering, which is nice and direct, although at lower speeds, some people might find it to be a little bit heavy. While it does deliver on that sporty drive experience, you do pay a bit of a price in terms of ride comfort. It isn't as cushy as the Peugeot over bumps, and that might be a deal breaker depending on what your preferences are. The biggest perceived disadvantage for the Peugeot is that it isn't available with all-wheel drive. Now, that might be a problem for you if you're a ski bunny or if you're one of those active lifestyle adventurer types that car marketers are constantly aiming their cars at. But in reality, most of us won't hit the open road every single weekend, and even fewer will tackle slippery gravel tracks to warrant all-wheel drive. There might be a slight disadvantage in terms of the amount of torque the Peugeot has, but because it is substantially lighter than the CX-5, you don't notice any detriment. In fact, it's quite punchy. The 6-speed automatic can get a little bit confused at times, particularly when you're on the open road and it's trying to find the right gear when you're overtaking or just trying to maintain pace. But around town, it's really well sorted. Sure, it doesn't have the same sort of planted feel as the Mazda in corners, but it doesn't really disappoint in any way either. And even though both cars have 19-inch wheels with pretty low profile tyres, the Peugeot's ride comfort is better. It's more absorbent over bumps, and that means it's more relaxing to drive. There's no doubt the Mazda CX-5 deserves its spot on top of the sales charts. It's a likeable and polished SUV, one with plenty of tech and heaps of family-friendly features. But if you could do without all-wheel drive, maybe you're not going to hit the road every other weekend, then you could probably do with checking out the Peugeot 3008. I think it's prettier, it's also equally as punchy, and it is a bit more practical than its competitor.